By the way, it's useful for public service as well. This is a map showing the location of the calls that came into OnStar during the evacuation of Houston during Hurricane Rita in 2005. Every blue dot is where somebody was when they pushed the OnStar button for some sort of assistance, and the red ones are where people pushed the buttons, the emergency button, for some sort of assistance. FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, is working, and Centers for Disease Control is working with OnStar to be able to use these data to give them real-time information on trouble spots during disasters and evacuations, which they can't get any other way right now, notwithstanding the prevalence of social media, Twitter, location services on your cell phones. Other things that it can do, every month if you sign up, it'll send you an email with the status of your car. Is the oil good? Are the tires properly inflated? When do you have to go in for service? This is an extremely valuable service. And behind the scenes, it's giving GM enormously valuable data on the performance of their vehicles. Early detection of defects or other issues that might lead to warranty claims or even recalls that they can then fix much faster than ever before. Destination download I described. This is data, market research data that they can collect from OnStar drivers. In this case, they're using it to optimize decisions for the design of the Chevy Volt. So what they're able to do with this is figure out what fraction of people are driving a certain number of miles every day, and then figure out how much battery life they need in the Volt so that, say, 90% of those people can get to their job and home every day and maybe to the supermarket without having to worry about going off the battery and onto the gasoline engine. And you can control all that from your smartphone. Okay, so phenomenal service, but it didn't start out this way. In fact, it started out in the mid-90s as an analog cell phone-based system that was available only as an aftermarket dealer-installed option on high-end Cadillacs. So here you've got a 1995 Cadillac Sedan DeVille. It's the kind of car it would have been installed on. And the way it would work is, if you were going to buy a Cadillac, and if the dealer you went to knew about OnStar, which isn't certain back then, and if that dealer had trained any of their salespeople to sell it to you, which isn't at all certain, and if that salesperson thought it might be worthwhile, worth their time to try to pitch it to you, and if they did, and if you thought it was good and said, okay, I'd like to have it, then you had to fork over about $2,500 to buy the option and give your car back to the dealer for 3 days so they could rip out the wiring harness and put in the OnStar hardware. Then you could have your car back. Needless to say, not many people were doing this. And so after a couple of years, they didn't have a very large installed base of users. Now, Ron Zarella was the president of what they call North American Operations at GM at this time. He later went on and became the CEO of Bausch & Lomb. But as the president of NAO, he's basically the #2 guy in all of GM. Rick Wagner was the CEO during this time. And Ron is in charge of this and all the other big decisions over GM in North America. And he's basically looking at OnStar and he's going, you know, this just isn't working. And he called in Vince Baraba, his head of strategy, and he said, Vince, this just isn't working. Give me a reason why I shouldn't just pull the plug and kill this. It's costing us a ton of money, and it's just not getting traction in the marketplace. And Vince made 2 arguments as to why it shouldn't just be killed. First argument was, well, not many people have it, but the people who do have it love it. The market research showed that they just were thrilled with it, even though back then in the mid-90s it was analog cell phone. There are all these services that I just showed you, many of them weren't there. Safety and security, crash response, the phone, that was there, but a lot of the other services weren't there. But the people who had it loved it. And the second reason, Vince says, is, Ron, you know our traditional business model is just not working. And Ron goes, of course we know that. You know, our margins are 1 or 2% in a good year. And we can't make any money during bad years. We lose billions of dollars. And so Vince said, yeah, so we basically got to get out of the car business and into a service business. So how would that work? Well, so here what you see is the installed base of General Motors vehicles on the North American roads that are still owned by their original purchaser. So Frederick and his brand new Cadillac, or you and your brand new Chevrolet. Okay? It's increased by retail sales. Let's leave fleet and corporate sales out of it. And then people trade them in, and now it's still on the road but not being driven by the first owner. Back when this was being done, General Motors was selling about 4 million units a year into the North American retail market. If the average person is keeping their car for 5 years, how many GM vehicles are in that bucket of GM vehicles being driven by their original owner? How many? 20 million. How much revenue did General Motors get from those 20 million units on the road? Zero. Well, if you bought your car with a loan or had a lease, you made that payment. But that was just stretching out the payment for the car over time. And there's parts and service, but basically zero. Billions of minutes of cell phone calls were made from those cars every year. How much of that did GM get? Zero. How much of the insurance did they get? Practically nothing. They had a small subscale insurance company I'm going to talk about. But what would the impact be? Well, imagine you could do this, 20 million times 500 a year. That's 10 billion a year in incremental revenue. That's practically nothing for GM. During this period, their top line, their sales are 180 to 200 billion dollars a year. So that's really not much of a contribution to the top line. But the margin on services is enormous compared to the margin on selling new cars. These services are very profitable. Perhaps, let's imagine a 20% margin. Now you may think that's not realistic. Fine, cut the number in half. But that would be an incremental net income of $2 billion a year. Now what does that do to General Motors' market value? Well, during this period, General Motors was trading at an average price-earnings ratio of 6 to 12. Now the stock market in the United States was trading at about 15. So GM was already out of favor as a stock, trading at a substantial discount in terms of their earnings. But let's just assume that that price-earnings ratio holds. What does that $2 billion a year do to market value? Well, it's an incremental 12 to 24 billion in General Motors market value. Now, like I say, you don't like my numbers? Fine, cut them in half. 6 billion in incremental market value. That's a huge deal. How do I know? Well, in September 2008, before GM filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, their total market cap is only $6.5 billion. This is a huge, huge opportunity. And so what Zarella said is, all right, Vince, I'm going to give you 60 days or whatever it was to see if you can come up with a strategy for OnStar that's going to make it worth saving. And they did that by using system dynamics, using our methodology, led by Nick and some of the others on the team. Now, what were the big strategic issues? So now we're in about 1997. This is getting underway. And they've got two big issues. First one is this a car option or is it a service business? Now, what do you think the right answer is? Okay, here's the deal. You got to vote, so you got to raise your hand for one of these two options. No abstentions allowed. So how many for it's an option? How many for it's a service business? Yeah. So what do you think the thinking was in the room in 1997? Option. Why? Yeah. We're a car company. We're not a service business. We don't know anything about being in the service business. We're not AT&T. We're not Verizon. We're not your bank, thank goodness. We don't know anything about service business. What we do know is how to price options. We're really good at that. So we're going to, figure out how to price it using standard market research tools, and it'll be just like buying a sunroof. No problem. Now, if you do go down the service business route, you still have a couple of big choices. Is it going to be an evolutionary strategy or a revolutionary strategy? So what do I mean? Well, when they talked about this issue, the conversation went something like this. You want us to get into the service business. We don't know anything about it. We better go really slow. That would be evolutionary. So what evolutionary means is we're going to introduce it very gradually. We're going to start with those high-end Cadillacs, and then maybe after we've learned how to do it well, we'll roll it out onto the Buicks, and then down the value ladder until eventually maybe we'll think about putting it on Chevrolet. We're going to price it high to extract the maximum willingness to pay from these affluent customers. We're not going to market it aggressively. And we're not going to get out there and seek alliances with third parties who might provide content for us. Okay? That's evolutionary. Revolutionary says, no, get it out there as fast as possible on the entire product line. Even the cheapest Chevrolet should have OnStar as fast as possible. Price it really low so everybody will take it, market the heck out of it, and aggressively go out there and seek alliances with third parties who could provide content through the system into the vehicle for these customers. Now, what do you think the thinking was in the room about those choices? So again, you got to vote. How many for evolutionary? We don't know anything about it. We better go slow, learn by doing, so we don't blow $1 billion or $3. How many for that? How many for revolutionary? It's about 50-50. Actually, I think evolutionary is slightly in the majority here. So now how are you going to resolve these issues? Remember, this is a business that does not exist. GM is the first entrant to this market. There are no other telematics systems out there at all during this time. They're creating a market that doesn't exist. You cannot go to prior market research. You cannot go to analogous products. You cannot go and find out any revealed preference data. It is not out there. You can maybe get some stated preference data, but we all know what that means. So how are you going to do this? So here's the process that they use. They call it the dialogue decision process. And this is the process they use for modeling. Now, this is a very different picture than that open loop one-way picture I showed you at the beginning. Because here what you've got is continual feedback between two groups. The project team, so that's Nick and Mark and Smith and some of the others who are doing the modeling. And then the decision board, these are the top people. So that's Rick Wagner, the CEO, Ron Zarella, the president of NAO, the CFO, the heads of the car brands, the chief of engineering, product development, and Vince Sparava. These are the people who make the decisions. They control the resources. They have to be part of the modeling process in a meaningful way or nothing can change. Their mental models have to change. But they're too busy and don't have the skills to do the modeling and analysis. So you create this process that's highly iterative and takes a lot of their time. A lot of their time. So you have to be delivering value in every meeting, and they're able to do that by getting their models going right away. Now I'm going to gloss some things here so we can move on, but let me show you what's in the model. And the slides are going to get a little small, so you guys in the back, you may need to come up a little bit. So here's that picture that I kind of showed you at the beginning. There's the installed base, only now it's the installed base of OnStar equipped vehicles. Okay? And it's filled up every time GM sells a vehicle that's got OnStar. And it's drained every time an OnStar customer turns off their service and stops paying for it. The car is still on the road, but they're not purchasing the service anymore. Okay? So if you're going to be successful, you've got to do a couple of things. First of all, you have got to create awareness that this product and service even exists. Because it's brand new and there's nothing else like it. Nobody knows what it is. You got to persuade, you got to make people aware of what it is, and then it has to be appealing enough, it has to be attractive enough that once they're aware of it, the next time they go to purchase a car, they might actually buy a GM vehicle in order to get OnStar. So you have to have both awareness and appeal. So how are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to run through some of the feedbacks that were in the model. And remember what feedback here is. It's that closed loop of reflexive self-creating causality. Now, every time somebody churns, it's because they didn't find the service sufficiently attractive. That's going to lower the installed base in the same way that low attractiveness is going to choke off new installations. So for the purpose of keeping the diagrams clean, I'm going to omit the link to churn. But remember that everything that boosts sales is going to also suppress churn and have the same impact of boosting your installed base. All right, so how are you going to build awareness? This is a real question. How are you going to build awareness? Obviously, for this audience, you're going to advertise it, right? There's all kinds of marketing channels we can use here. What else?
Recommendation.
Yeah, word of mouth or recommendations from people who have it now. Now, in this market for this kind of service, do you think word of mouth is going to be powerful or weak? There are many products for which word of mouth is simply weak. I do not see a lot of people going, hey, I got a new toilet. Come on over and check it out. That, I got flush, running water. It's just not the way it works. So there's no word of mouth on that. Although, you know, you could think of some of the Korean and Japanese super high-tech toilets that they don't have much in the United States. That's going to attract a little buzz. But, you know, come on into my bathroom, let me show you my toilet is not really going to be a big word of mouth generator. What about this product and service? Is word of mouth going to be weak or strong? It's going to be incredibly strong. Because it's wicked cool, as we say in Boston, and it's easy to demonstrate. It's got all the attributes that Rogers talks about that make for good innovation diffusion. It's easy to demonstrate. The impact of it is highly salient. It's highly trialable, etc. In fact, what they found out at the beginning, in the first couple of years of OnStar, take off my jacket here. What they found out is very often the calls to OnStar were coming in from the home address of the subscriber at 0 miles per hour. What was that about? They were showing it to their friends and neighbors. This has big implications, by the way, for the rest of your strategy. If I'm showing it to my friends and neighbors, when I push the button, what better happen? It better work, and the person at the other end needs to be friendly, knowledgeable, and helpful. Otherwise, that word of mouth is going to be unfavorable and choke off the whole market. Okay, so here's those two feedback loops, all right? The first one says, the bigger the installed base, the more word of mouth you're going to get. That's going to boost awareness, lead to more OnStar sales, further increasing the installed base in a virtuous cycle, leading to runaway awareness growth. And the second one is, of course, that awareness can be generated by marketing. So marketing requires a budget. Where does that budget come from? It comes from revenue. Where does the revenue come from? Well, if this is a service business, the revenue comes from the installed base, because every month they're going to pay their monthly fee like you pay your cell phone bill. So the bigger the installed base, the more revenue, the bigger the budget, the more marketing and advertising, still greater awareness, more installations, still bigger installed base. These are two very powerful reinforcing feedback loops in any business. And if you can't demonstrate to your client that these loops are going to be strong, or some other reinforcing loop that can boost awareness, whether it's media coverage or Twitter feeds or whatever, then there's no hope for you, because awareness will never take off. Now at the beginning, of course, word of mouth is very unimportant, because there's just not a lot of people out there in the installed base. There's Frederick and his Cadillac, and that's about it. So marketing's got to get the ball rolling, but later word of mouth is going to be the most important thing, because it's persuasive and it's just huge. So that's going to be generating your awareness, and I could add, but I'm not, the free media attention that you get in the trade press and on Edmunds.com and so on and so forth. But all of that is creating virtuous cycles that boost awareness. Now you got to have attractiveness too. So what makes it attractive? Well, it's the services. Where do the services come from? So alliances is one way they can come, but even before that, the first thing that happens is GM develops the services that are then offered. Crash response, hands-free phone call, etc. So the bigger your installed base, the more feedback you get from your subscribers telling you which services they actually find valuable and which ones they might want, which allows you to tailor those services to their latent needs and then offer a more attractive product, leading to more sales and a still bigger installed base. But just knowing the subscriber experience doesn't automatically translate into new services. First of all, it costs money to collect that information. But secondly, you've got to develop those new products, and that's going to take money. The second thing, of course, is alliances. You're not, as General Motors, going to be in a position to develop all the content that you can deliver in the car. You're not going to be in the newspaper business, for example. So you're going to have to go out there and build alliances with third parties. In order to induce a third party to want to work with you to provide that service, you have to demonstrate to that third party that you're going to offer them a market big enough for them to make a big pile of money. And so the bigger the installed base and the bigger the share of the revenue they can get, either directly or indirectly, for example, through advertising, the more attractive that OnStar platform is going to be, and the more alliances you're actually going to be able to get, more attractive service, still more sales, still bigger installed base. Now what does that actually look like? What that looks like is, imagine that they go to, say, Dow Jones, which owned the Wall Street Journal at that time, so this was before Murdoch bought it, and they go, hey, Wall Street Journal, we would like to partner with you so that if people push the button, they have the option to hear the headlines of the Wall Street Journal read to them by a synthesized voice over the stereo in the car while they're driving to work. That would be really great. And then the first question you're going to get from the Dow Jones people when you have that meeting, how many subscribers have you got? And at the beginning of this service you go, well, we have about 10,000 and it's an aftermarket option and it costs $2,500. That's it, meeting over. Now if you can go to them and say we've got 6 million subscribers, not only will they take that meeting, but they will probably pay you to put their content into the car instead of the New York Times or whatever. And then they'll hope to make money on the deal by advertising and by picking up regular subscribers. So that's how that works. What else? Well, another big determinant of attractiveness is how much does it cost, the price, obviously. So there's your subscription rate. And the higher that is, the less attractive it is. But what do we know about the costs of these kinds of IT-mediated services? Well, they go down over time. So how do you think about this? Well, the cost per subscriber is going to determine the price, the difference being the markup. That's a strategy variable you get to select. The cost per subscriber has two parts, of course, fixed costs and variable costs. And what do we know about those costs? Well, what we know is that you have your total fixed costs of providing the service, creating the technology, building the command center, maintaining your PSAP database. That's a fixed cost that you have to bear no matter how many subscribers you've got. But you get to amortize that over the installed base. So the bigger the installed base, the lower the unit fixed costs, another powerful reinforcing feedback that can drive your unit costs down. What about the variable costs? The cost of the electronics that go into the vehicle, the cost of adding operators to your call centers as your subscriber base grows. Well, we know those are going to go down over time too. Why? Two main effects. The first one is the learning curve. As we build experience, as cumulative production experience goes up, the costs of this should go down. Your cell phone does more and costs far less today than it did in 1998 because of this effect in the electronics industry in general and for the specific application of mobile telephony in particular. And you're going to have economies of scale. So again, you go to an electronics producer, Foxconn or whatever it might be, and you say, we want you to produce this chipset for us. How many people have you got? And they say, well, you know, we're doing about 10,000 a year. They won't even take the meeting. You go to them and you say, you got 6 million a year. They're going to give you a very good price. And this is maybe more engineering detail than you want, but when you're only doing a small volume, you have to put a lot of the functionality on custom boards. But once you get to a large volume, it's now worthwhile to design ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. So put all that functionality on a chip instead of on circuit boards, dramatically lowering the cost. And by the way, taking up less space in the car, lowering power consumption, and improving its survivability for crashes. So all of that does is it means that as you sell more and as your installed base is bigger, the cost per subscriber goes down, which allows you to offer this at a lower and lower price and boost your attractiveness and build up an even bigger subscriber base. But we're not done yet. What about the availability of OnStar on the fleet? So all this is great. You're going to have terrific services. You're going to have a low price, maybe. But if you can't get it on anything but a Cadillac, first of all, none of this stuff is going to work. And secondly, most people aren't buying Cadillacs. So you have a big decision here. How do you get it out there on more vehicles? Well, that means you've got to make a decision about putting it on the entire portfolio of GM vehicles. And that means you got to decide, are we going to do it as a factory installed piece of hardware rather than an aftermarket option? All right, and I'll say more about that in a minute. What's going to make that attractive? The lower your costs, the easier it is to put it on the full portfolio. If it costs $2,000 in hardware, you're not going to put it in a $15,000 Chevy. Because now you're not going to sell any of those Chevys, or you're going to take a big bath on it if you do. If you can get the cost down to a few $100s, you can put it in the car and not change the MSRP at all. So the lower the cost per subscriber, the more models you can put it on, and that increases availability. You sell more, the installed base goes up some more, and then costs go down even more. Now, here's a tough question. Should we license OnStar to other auto OEMs? In other words, should we go out there and see if Toyota and Honda and Ford want to put our system in their cars? What do you think? Should we do that? Okay, again, you got to vote. You got to put your hand up for one option. Yes, we should go out there and license it to other OEMs. No, we should not. Okay, you got to vote. Way in the back, you got to vote. So, which one do you want? Yeah, you. Yes, we should do it. Okay, so you're about evenly split. What do you think the thinking in the room was in 1997? No. It was more like, are you bleeping crazy? We've been losing market share for decades. We're barely holding on, and you want to take the most innovative service offering that we've got that could be a distinctive differentiator for us, and you want to give it to our competitors? Are you bleeping crazy? Well, so let's think about this. What would cause a Toyota or a Honda or a Subaru to want to put OnStar in their car rather than either doing nothing or building their own system? Well, you can see part of the story here. The more attractive it is, the more likely they are to do it. Well, what's going to make it attractive? The size of the installed base and the cost. Yeah. So that arrow should be there as well. If the cost of OnStar is lower, then it's going to be a much tougher thing for you to build a competing system, because you're going to have to spend all that upfront money, but then price it really low. You're never going to make money on it. So if GM can work these feedbacks quickly and effectively, driving their costs down and raising the services that they offer, the amount of money that a competitor would have to invest to offer a comparable service set at a low enough price is so overwhelmingly large, it will never be a good decision for them. And then they have to come and license it from you. And since they have a very poor BATNA, that is best alternative to buying OnStar from you, you can charge them a lot of money for that. Now, you may choose to do it as private label. That is, it's not going to be GM OnStar in a Subaru. But it would still be your service, and you get to count those people in your installed base and amortize your fixed costs over that. So here are your main strategic decisions. How much are you going to mark up the costs? So what price are you going to charge? Are you going to go out there and aggressively seek alliances with third parties who can provide content in the car? Are you going to factory install it, and if so, across the whole portfolio, and how fast? And then are you going to go out there and license this to other auto OEMs? Now, there's a quantitative simulation model behind all this, and you might be asking, well, how did they get the data to quantify these relationships when it's a brand new market? And this is all kinds of data that's going to be very tough. So costs, well, they know what their costs are today, but how fast might they decline as they build up experience and go down the learning curve? So there's a technological forecasting component here that's pretty challenging. And they're able to do that by looking at the history of related consumer electronics kinds of products. Even more interesting, and especially from your point of view, how do they assess the attractiveness story here? In other words, how do you come to understand customers' preferences when this is a brand new system? Well, so you have a little tiny bit of experience with the Cadillac owners, but you know, that's not a demographic that's typical. There's an old joke, back in this period in the 1990s, Cadillac was a dying brand. This is before they licensed the Led Zepp catalog, before they redesigned all the Cadillacs, before the Escalade. This was a dying brand. The average Cadillac owner was a white male retiree. In fact, they used to have a joke in GM that went something like this. hey, those guys over at Chevy, they offer first-time car buyers, kids out of college, etc., they offer first-time car buyers a discount if they buy a Chevy. What we need in Cadillac is a last-time buyer's discount. So, you know, we've got a little experience with our Caddy owners, but it's not relevant, it's not terribly relevant because they're not like the big mass of our customer base. So what do? Well, so you got to get out there with all kinds of market research tools that you're very familiar with and do the clinics and create the simulated environments and test labs and then get the stated preference data and run your conjoints. And they did all of that and integrated it into the model, and they were able to parameterize the logit choice models that they're using in there. Now they're constantly updating that as they get more experience, but this is how they did it. And of course they had to do a lot of sensitivity analysis. Now, let's talk about the factory install decision. To make the decision to install this across the entire product line, that's going to be a lot of money you got to spend, because you've got to now go to every car brand, Pontiac, Chevrolet, Buick, Cadillac, GMC, even the Hummers. And you got to go to those people and say, we need you to stop your product development process for a little bit, delay some of the other things you are doing, and figure out how to redesign your vehicle to put OnStar hardware in the factory.